There we go. There we are. All right. Don't let your computer get fried by losing power for 2 days and sitting in almost freezing temperatures. Let me see if I can get that audio gain back up, because this is a little bit quiet. All right. Hopefully I didn't just blow out some eardrums. Let me try that. Okay, sounds good to me. Let me know if you want me to crank it up a little bit more. But that sounds like a good gain to me. Good enough to not get buzzing. Okay. All right, now, thank you for that quick warning. And sorry about that. I had, again, no power for a couple days here. Almost froze to death. That's a burn wood for warmth like the pioneers. But we're back now. And luckily, cellular internet carried me through to teach you guys for the last few days. So final projects are posted. Make sure that you talk to me about what topic you'd like. Any tech topic, basically, I'm amenable to. So send me a DM on Discord or email me or leave a comment on the assignment if you haven't already. It's kind of on a first come, first served basis. We can have a few duplicates. I don't mind. But if there's something you're really interested in, try to reach out sooner rather than later. And it is an up to 10-page paper, and it is worth 20% of your course grade. So I recommend not blowing it off until the very last day. A couple pages a day makes it a lot less painful, especially since to get a good score, to get a really high score, you do need to indulge in the occasional seeking out of references, doing a little research. You're not just writing here, you're also researching the tech, coming up with some stats and figures and things to show to your team. Because, of course, if you were trying to pitch a tech to your team and you did it based on the Wikipedia page, that would make them very unhappy, I'm sure. And it would probably make you very unhappy when you ultimately ended up having to work with it. So make sure that you know whether or not you actually want to pitch for it or not. Remember, you can pitch for or against. So after doing your research, if you find out what you picked as your topic is crap, you are welcome to argue against it instead of for it. But do get something on your mind that you're going to look into in more detail so you can decide whether you're going to keep it or lose it. All right, let's go on to code review. Many people's least favorite part of working in the tech field, especially people who are not great at taking criticism. So let's see what code review is all about. So what is it? In a nutshell, code review is somebody looking at somebody else's code and then talking to them about it. Every software company does code review, even if they don't mean to do it. There is no company out there where everybody just writes their own code and nobody ever looks at it and they never discuss it with one another. It's going to happen at some point. You're going to have to discuss what somebody else did. If there is such a company where everybody is completely modular, then they're really not a company at all. They're just a bunch of freelancers that happen to be affiliated with one another. So you're going to end up in a code review of some sort, and if your company that you end up with doesn't have an official kind of code review process, that is a bad sign for you. That's a red flag. So you should probably start seeking out another job if there's no code review at all at your company. And you'll figure out why as we go through these slides here. So why do we do code review? At most places, the main reason that we have a code review is for a second set of eyes to spot mistakes, errors, whatever. And there are also other issues, but that is the main one. And we're doing code review so that the second person can see mistakes that the first person made before it ends up in production and it ends up as an error. But we're also trying to bring code into maybe a standard compliance that the original didn't do, so maybe they missed some standard, maybe there's testing requirements or not format, but other kinds of standards here. Sometimes format requirements too, though. Sometimes there are style requirements. You want to verify that different unit tests are working. You want to verify that integration is going to be easy with this new module that was just constructed. So sometimes a person writes a piece of code and they're ready to push it out to the rest of the project, the main branch or what have you, and it doesn't integrate as well as they thought it would. And a second set of eyes that's maybe more familiar with the project in general might be able to spot those issues with integration earlier on. The way companies handle code review, again, varies completely. Some companies don't have it at all. Some companies will do it on every piece of code that you submit. Some companies will do it every time you make a push to some branch, the master branch, or a branch that's awaiting merge into the master branch, depending on how they structure it. Some places will do a code review just before pushes to production. Some places might do multiple reviews along the way. They might do both of those things. So again, varies completely. When and how you do it, I think there's no right way. Nobody can say that there's a right way and a wrong way in terms of when and how. But the fact that it happens at all, I think, is the right way. If you're not doing any kind of regular code review for your developers before pushes to production at some point, then your company is in line for some expensive disasters eventually. Now, at good companies, code review serves another important role, and that is the mentoring role for junior developers, which all of you are at this point, hopefully, junior developers. And senior developers should be mentoring junior developers at good companies. In fact, the more senior you become, the more skilled you become as a developer, the less time you should spend programming, because the more knowledgeable you become, the more valuable you are as a mentor than you are as a programmer, and the more valuable you are as an organizer than you are as a programmer. So this is a little bit paradoxical, because we like to think you get better and better at programming and you just keep programming. But at a certain point, when you get very, very good at programming, you should actually be spending more of your day helping other people to program than programming yourself. And some of this includes other duties like interviewing folks as well too. Obviously, the more skilled you are, the better you should be at identifying the skill of others. So as you advance in your career, expect to spend less and less time programming as you go. Now, the person who is mentoring you might not necessarily be your senior overall, and that's fine. They might just be more experienced than you in a specific area. They might have more time at that specific company. They might have more time in that specific project. So it's not necessarily even that they are higher ranked than you, just that they understand more about what it is that they are reviewing than you do, presumably. And at good companies, the code review is not explicitly tied to your performance review. I think this is a very important thing to note. That means that you don't have to be accountable in terms of losing your raise or potentially being terminated or anything like that. It does not impact your future at the company if you do bad in a code review. The fact that that is the case means that there's essentially no judgment, and unless you fail repeatedly in all of your code reviews, it's not going to impact the perception of your performance in terms, again, of your raises and your staying at that company and all that kind of thing. So if you're at a good company, the code review process is separate from the performance evaluations. There might be some metrics that are linked, but it's not like you're doing quarterly code reviews as part of your performance evaluation. If you're doing that, that is a red flag that your company is not great. So at bad companies, and also at university, a little bit of a self-burn here, your code review is tied to your performance review, which is obviously how every homework assignment works, right? So essentially every time I grade your homework, that's a code review of sorts. And I tell you what you did wrong, and then you get no chance to correct it, and I penalize you on a performance level. So that is the worst kind of code review. But it's the only kind that we have available to us, because if we let you fix mistakes on a weekly basis, it would end up pretty ridiculous, wouldn't it? So we have a code review at university where you don't get a chance to correct your mistakes, and you end up just getting a performance evaluation type penalty. And that's perfectly fine in our context. That is definitely not the way you want it to go in industry. So hopefully you never experience this kind of code review again. And if you go straight from academia into industry, stop trying to do other people's code reviews as if you're grading them. You're not grading them. You're trying to improve the quality of their code. You're trying to make their code base cleaner, because their code base is your code base. And again, that's the goal. Reduce errors, make it cleaner, make it better. The goal of code review is to make better code, not to evaluate people. And again, at bad companies, you'll also see every code review get some sort of evaluation. Maybe the reviewer has to fill out a form or they score you. Maybe they have to measure like lines of code contributed or something. Maybe they have to measure how many corrections they made. Maybe there's a performance metric on them as a reviewer, so they get more points for how many comments they make or something like that. Those are completely asinine things to do, and those are done at companies that don't know what they're doing and want to make sure their developers have a lousy time. Another bad sign is if your code reviews are being conducted by somebody who is your equal, roughly at your level, maybe even below your level, or someone else who is a junior dev, somebody for whom you are not able to learn much from them. So if your code reviews are being conducted by somebody that can't really teach you much, that's a bad sign. Again, a little bit of a self-burn there since I said university, huh? But yeah, if you're getting code reviews from people who are either as skilled or less skilled than you, there is not a ton of value in that. At that point, you're basically pair programming, and that is not at all the same because you're not getting any of that mentorship. You're just basically learning by competing against one another there, and that's not as good. So the best reviews teach you these things. This is what you're trying to learn when you're getting reviewed. You're trying to learn how to not over-engineer. That is one of the most important things for juniors to learn on their transition to seniorhood. Do the bare minimum. That sounds like a very simple thing to do. It also sounds like something that would get you a bad grade in academic practice, but no, I don't think it would, because the bare minimum doesn't mean do the least amount possible. It means do the least amount possible that solves the task at hand. Which is always what you should be doing. You should be doing it for all of your homeworks. You should be doing it for all of your tests. In fact, you should probably apply that philosophy everywhere in life. I can't think of very many places where giving 110% actually pays off. Give exactly the amount of percent that you need to give to finish the job. You don't get any points for doing the job beyond completion. Getting something working is the ultimate goal. Don't add features that are not yet needed. There is a tendency, especially among newer developers, to start branching out to different features as fast as they can, adding potential for features that don't even exist yet, adding interfaces and things for features that are going to come in the future. Don't add them until you need them. That's the zen of the senior developer. And don't use tech that the team doesn't understand. That can mean just you, that can mean everybody else. The tech that you use has to be mutually understood. So if you're going to use a library somewhere, make sure everybody knows how to use it. If you're going to use some kind of platform, make sure everybody knows how to use it. Don't reinvent things. You should research harder, read more, and then integrate existing solutions better into your work. Learn how to integrate stuff from outside sources rather than reinventing every single time. Integrating wherever possible rather than coming up with something new every single time. Only reinvent things when the existing solution is crap, and then learn to recognize when a solution is crap, because that's not easy. Let's say that you're trying to find a library to perform some complex system I/O task. If one already exists out there, use it. If it exists but it doesn't solve your problem exactly, try to tweak it. If you can't tweak it because the code base is so terrible that you can't understand it, ask your senior developer if they can understand it. And if they can't, then it's crap and you should rebuild it from scratch. And that's approximately how it should go. Okay. Bad reviews, on the other hand, are basically nitpicking you, things about your formatting and other useless choices. You've got too many spaces here, you've got too many tabs there. Proposing some kind of change in the technology that you're using without a justification. So I don't know, you're using TCP instead of UDP. I prefer UDP. It doesn't matter what you prefer. If it works, it works. You shouldn't have proposals for changes in technology unless there's a reason for it. If somebody tells you that you should change tech for some reason, or you should change the kind of platform you're using, they should have a specific reason why. You should be able to ask them and say, why should I make that change? And there should be a better answer than I like it, or I like the alternative. Style complaints are annoying, and you obviously don't want to see those, like, oh, I prefer my curly bracket at the beginning of the if statement, I prefer it at the end of the if statement, I prefer a new line, whatever. None of that stuff matters. Even if your company has a style guide, I think enforcing those kinds of complaints is pretty low. Sure, you can auto-format it into the company's style guide, but good organizations will have some kind of rule like whoever wrote it first gets to pick the style, and that's, I think, a pretty fair rule. So, unless your style is widely disassociated with everybody else's, I would say, don't nitpick people for style. And when people nitpick you on style, those people are being annoying. Now you'll see a lot of this kind of thing, the nitpicks for style, the you've got too many spaces here, at those kinds of bad companies where the people reviewing you have metrics that they need to meet as well. So they need to provide so many comments, or they need to make so many edits before something can be improved so it looks like they read it. So of course they're incentivized to make these stupid kinds of comments to you, and that's why that kind of environment quickly becomes toxic. And then the worst kind of review is a review that asks you to rewrite something in a different way when it already works. And by works, I mean it integrates correctly, it passes its unit tests, it actually it can make it into production and operate successfully. So I don't mean that it works in your testing environment only, but clearly it's not going to work based on the reviewer's experience in production. I mean, if it completely works and they tell you that they want you to rewrite it anyway because they don't like the way that it works, well, that's usually a red flag that you're getting bad reviews from people who are a little bit too egotistical. It's not like everybody who gets promoted is automatically a beacon of knowledge. So code reviews are supposed to teach you senior level skills like architecture, design, abstraction, integration, planning, leadership. Those are not things that you're being taught directly. There is not a big pipeline in development to get to any of those jobs. You really don't get a lot of opportunity to work in those things unless you are on some kind of leadership track where you get some additional training. Your average developer doesn't spend a lot of time doing any of these things. They basically follow the architecture and design of their seniors as they are ordered to do so. They follow the abstraction as they're ordered to do so. They don't get to do the integration that's done by somebody higher up. So when you see all those things get done, and when you're questioned about how your choices fit into those things, you learn more about how those things are done. You learn more about how those things are done well. When the person conducting the review describes or asks you about how you think your code fits into the plan and tells you in what ways your code doesn't fit into the plan, or it violates their abstraction model, or it violates their design, that's how you learn how to make good design, how to make good abstraction, and how to plan well. And of course, getting a review is itself an act of leadership. So somebody commented that some IDEs at companies auto-force style. Yeah, absolutely. If your company has an auto-formatted style, use it. Don't be the one person who stands out. If your company enforces you must install all of these styles into Visual Studio and you got to use them, where did I go? Then do so. Just use the style that they have. Don't try to put your own style on everything in terms of where your curly brackets go and all the indentation and stuff. Just use the existing one, and then you won't get nitpicked in your code review. And again, if you make a minor violation of it, like you have an extra space somewhere, hopefully nobody is too annoying about it. The other thing that you want to learn as you advance and as you get your code reviewed is to be as boring as possible, is to escape the allure of new and complicated tasks. Always pick the simplest tool for the job. It's something that you learn when you're a craftsman too. A lot of the time when people start doing a craft, like take for example painting. Painting is a craft that a lot of people probably have some experience with. When you first start painting as a layperson, you buy the fancy tape, you buy the fancy roller, maybe you buy the spray gun, maybe you buy the equipment, maybe you buy the tarps, you buy all the scaffolding, all this crap. You know what the professionals usually show up with? A brush and a roller, right? Because they know that's the tool. That's what you use. You don't use all this other fancy junk. Likewise, if you're constructing in some other craft, mechanics, all of that stuff, you look at the kind of stuff they use. They'll buy the expensive, reliable tools, but they don't do fancy, weird, crazy stuff like a lot of beginners do. There's usually a standard, appropriate, and very boring tool to complete a job. If you want to bash in a nail, you use a hammer. You don't go and find, a pneumatic drill or something. The easiest way to bash a simple nail is a hammer. And you want to do the same thing in computer science. You don't want to be the person who is always seeking out the most complicated, fancy, and shiny mechanism that just hammers in nails. And go back and do the easiest thing possible. So if these aren't skills that you think you're learning at your code reviews, then you should seek out a new job. And the reason you should seek out a new job is because if you don't transition into a senior role before you get to a certain age, remember, age discrimination is pretty bad in computer science and the software field in general. So at a certain point, if you're still a junior developer and you are old, it's going to be very hard to find a job. Nobody wants to hire people in their 50s and 60s who only know how to program and don't have any of those skills described above. So I know people who are in their 50s and 60s who did learn those skills, they transition to senior roles, they're doing really, really well. And then I know people on the other side who didn't. They stayed in the boring, low-level programming roles where they write almost dead languages, and their day job was still programming, but many of those people are pretty much chronically unemployed at this point and probably aren't going to land a job or definitely aren't going to land a new one. And the ones that are employed live in constant stress of losing their job and not being able to land a new one. So you need to make sure that you transition into a more mentorial, managerial, senior role by the time you get too old to work as a regular programmer. Unless, of course, the industry suddenly becomes a lot nicer, which is unlikely. All right, so when you're in your code review, beforehand, you need to be prepared. You need to know your code. But when you're in it, don't be defensive. Be prepared to explain why you made certain decisions, because if it's a mentoring process, they're trying to understand your train of thought so that they can determine if it was right or wrong. Sometimes understanding your train of thought will demonstrate to them why what you chose is correct, because sometimes it's not immediately obvious, even to someone who's more experienced than you. Maybe you know something that they don't, because ultimately you did write it. Presumably you did more research than them. They're only reading it. You wrote it. So be prepared to explain why you made your decisions without being defensive about it. It might sound, depending on the company's culture, some places might be very polite about it. Some places are just blunt, frank, and to the point. Obviously, I prefer the latter. But if they're being blunt, frank, and to the point, they're going to ask you, why'd you do this? And the automatic response that most people have to that is, because it's what I did. Or, something of that nature. They're just going to try to defend it, defend it at all costs, because we like to defend our opinions. Don't necessarily defend your opinion, just explain why you made the choice you made without being too committed to it as an idea. Because at the end of the day, you're all just trying to make a better program. So it doesn't matter if it completely changes. It doesn't matter if your decision was wrong. Knowing why you made a decision important, because decisions that you made randomly or decisions you made without thinking it through usually suck. So if you make the impression that you made a decision randomly, that makes it far more likely to be questioned aggressively and to make the person who's reviewing your code really look into it and determine if there might be an alternative that's better thought out. Because if you picked it randomly or you didn't put too much thought into it, then it's probably wrong. But again, don't be too defensive, and it's also fine not to know why you did something necessarily all of the time. It's also fine to have a stupid reason, like let's say you wrote a sort and you just wrote a bubble sort. Obviously, bubble sort is not the best sort, we know. So if you get asked, why did you make this a bubble sort, it's fine to say, because it's the fastest that I can write. All right, and usually bubble sort is good enough. If it's something that's only happening once a minute on a list of 100 items, you don't have to worry about the fact that it doesn't scale to a million items unless it's going to scale to a million items at some point. You can always go back and fix it. So sometimes the quickest, easiest solution is fine, and sometimes it's not, but just be honest about why you made a decision. And if you made it because it's the easiest way, then it's the easiest way, and that's fine. Okay. Gotta let go of your ego. Letting go of your ego is the greatest hurdle to your professional growth. Becoming humble is the most difficult thing about becoming a professional in general. It's the most difficult thing about ascending in any job is becoming humble, but especially white-collar professional work. Generally, the people who reach the highest heights of humility too. Of course, there are caveats to this. There are companies where the culture is very aggressive, and if you admit a mistake, it's grounds for termination or grounds for demotion or grounds for not getting a raise. These kind of pass the buck cultures. There are big, usually tech companies where people make a lot of money. That's usually kind of how the culture is. Not all of them, and not all departments of all of them, but in certain groups. Those places usually, because they hire the best of the best and because they expect the very best performance. It's more expected there that mistakes aren't tolerated. This is probably the case of any profession. The most aggressive, the upper echelons of that profession, there tends to be less humility. Everybody's a lot more aggressive. But that's not the way the vast majority of the industry is. The vast majority of the industry appreciates the lowest possible ego. Being chewed out is really not a big deal. So if your ego can't stand being chewed out, then you really have a problem. You're going to get chewed out all the time, and it's not really a problem. You should be fine being chewed out. If being chewed out causes you anxiety, you wake up in the morning and you go, oh man, my boss is going to chew me out today, and that makes you nervous, that's a problem too. It shouldn't make you nervous. You should be calm about it. It's fine. It's a day-to-day task. It's just part of being employed, is being chewed out nonstop. If you're worried about it, you should try to not be worried about it. You should deal with yourself in such a way as to not be concerned about being chewed out all the time. Not to say that you want to be completely lazy and make all the mistakes you can because it doesn't matter. I just mean don't be afraid to be criticized because it's nonstop. There's no avoiding it. You'll never be perfect. You'll always make mistakes. You're going to get chewed out a lot. The person who is the smartest in the room by a long shot and tries to make it known that they are the smartest person in the room, so the person who's the top of the class and everybody knows it, that person is often a liability. They end up being more annoying than anything else. The person who's leagues ahead of everybody else in productivity, even though they're producing a large amount of the work, sometimes everybody dislikes them so much and they don't integrate with the team so well that they end up being let go first. It's not always the top people who are the best. It's the people who are the best at dealing with criticism and working with the rest of the team who are generally the best developers. Going back to geniuses there, geniuses tend to write genius code, and genius code is bad because genius code can't be read by people who aren't geniuses, right? So the only people who can read genius code are geniuses, and most of your team, unless you're in one of those jobs at the upper echelons again, most of your team is not geniuses. So if you're what you consider to be a software development genius and your code gets shot down in code review repeatedly, that's probably a sign that you need to stop writing genius code and write normal people code that normal people can read. And to give you an example of genius code, and not to say that you should never use regex, but let's say that you have some string to parse and you write some 34-character regex with all these different symbols and it parses the string perfectly. You wrote all of that. Let's say you even documented it meticulously, but no one else on your team understands regex. Is that a good idea? No. Because it's not that much more performant, and now nobody can maintain it but you. You know what something that nobody can maintain but you is? Well, that's a liability, right? Because what if you're not available? What if you get sick? What if you leave the company? Then everybody's screwed. So the best code is code that can be maintained by multiple people, not just by the one genius on the team. So teams have a very strong incentive not to allow anything through that can only be understood by one person. If something like that exists, then that one person has leverage over the group and they become a liability more than they become an asset. You might get a lot of code reviews where the tone is increasingly negative. You're just like, why won't they say anything nice about my code? Why do I always get this negative junk? Well, why would you get positive comments? I leave positive comments when I comment on your assignments because I want to show you what you're doing right because I'm educating you. I want to improve your self-esteem a bit. But if you're already educated, if you're already capable of doing the job, the positive comments are kind of a waste of space and a waste of time. Some people consider them patronizing too. If you're getting a good job from your coworker, it's a little weird. They're not your professor anymore. You're supposed to be working with them. And obviously them telling you not to change something is pointless. So saying this is good, don't change it, that's kind of pointless too. So outside of this educational context where we're trying to reinforce your good behavior, getting no comment is the same as getting a good job in many environments. And that's not true everywhere. A lot of places, because just, we like to be polite to one another, you'll get positive comments too. But then plenty of places will just not. The code review is only about spotting mistakes. It's not about, again, feeding your ego or improving your self-esteem at that point. It's just about spotting mistakes and mentoring you, and neither of those things are particularly helped by giving you credit where you've just done something adequately. Of course, if you go above and beyond, I think you should expect to get something for it, but above and beyond is a really difficult criteria to meet. That might take you back into genius code territory, which again is not a good thing. The constructive feedback is the goal of any editing process. If you're editing somebody's essay, if you're editing somebody's book, you're not going to tell them, oh, it was great, nice job. That's not helpful. You want to give them as much constructive feedback as possible so they know where they can do better. And again, don't take it personally. If you're at a good company, it shouldn't be impacting your performance review. It should all be for the sake of improving the quality of the code base and for mentoring you personally. So what should you do to prepare for a code review? Definitely remember what you wrote. Definitely remember why you wrote it. So go back and review your code. Remember what and why you did it. Write your unit tests if possible. So obviously for the design project, none of you guys did unit tests. That's fine. You were limited in time. But at many organizations, you would get mad chewed out for not writing unit tests. They would expect you to write those first. They might even expect you to write them before you write the code for the rest of the class. We don't emphasize that in academia much because it would take all of our time and we wouldn't be able to teach you how to program. But I wish we could emphasize it a little bit more because it is an important thing to do when you're actually testing, when you're actually writing code that's going to go into production that matters and isn't just for homework assignment. You better be testing it all the way as you go. So in that case, every class should have unit tests. Every method should have some kind of unit test. So whenever you write code, you better have some kind of unit tests. And not every company does any kind of testing, but the ones that don't usually pay for it with a lot of errors and a lot more review than they have to. If you think that you improved something, so if your change was maybe you upgraded a sort or something to a different kind of sort, don't just show up with the textbook and go quicksort is faster than bubble sort. That's not good enough. Run them both. Bring your benchmark. Make sure that the new one runs faster than the old one. If you added threading, then your standard of benchmarking is much higher because threads introduce all kinds of possibilities for defects. So you gotta demonstrate that you haven't broken anything and that you've made it significantly faster because you've added that layer of complexity. Review your own code first, obviously. Be your own reviewer before everybody else is. And keep an open mind. Make sure that you are not defensive again and open to seeing that you did something wrong. And be willing to admit it and make changes to your code down the road. In some organizations, the reviewer is actually the person who takes full liability for the push. So code is about to be pushed to production. It undergoes a review. Let's say you wrote something, you get ready to push it to production. Someone's assigned to review your code. It is them who get in trouble if there is a problem. This is a good culture, actually. It's a good thing. That means that the senior, who presumably knows better, is in charge of spotting issues. It puts you in a relationship where you feel bad if they get in trouble. Obviously, if you're not a psychopath, you're gonna want them to like you. Presumably, they have some superiority over you in the organizational structure too. So you don't want to irritate them by submitting junk that's going to cost them their job or make them unhappy because they're going to get chewed out. It gives you an extra motivation beyond just yourself getting chewed out. You don't want this other person to suffer. And it gives them more motivation to read your code and make the maximum possible impact in terms of mentoring you because they want it to be as good as it can be so that they don't get in trouble, they don't get chewed out. That's everybody's goal at work, just not to get chewed out, right? That great line from Office Space. It's the primary motivator is just not to get chewed out. That's fine. This is a good thing, but it means, again, your code reviews are going to be really tough because your senior reviewer is going to be on you to make sure that your code meets the standard. They're going to have to understand the whole thing. In this kind of organization, you can expect them to read every line, which means that if something's not commented or if something's difficult to understand, they're going to ask you to explain it. You need to be able to explain it well. And companies with this culture, you can tell that they're going to have this culture because when you go in for the interview, whatever code they make you write, whether they make you whiteboard or do some stupid leak code thing live, or they're going to make you do a take-home, whatever they make you do, when you come in, they're going to ask you to explain it in detail. And then you know that this is probably going to be a culture where your code is going to be reviewed aggressively. So if that's not for you, there's your chance to bail. But if you see this kind of thing, that's usually a good sign. It means that they're probably going to mentor you to an extent at least. Now, it's possible that that's not true. It's possible they only do that kind of code review in the interview and then never again. But, that's a little rare. I think most of the places that do really aggressive code review at the interview and expect you to explain everything, those places are also the kind that are going to do it when you're in the job. So if you're applying for lots of jobs, make sure that you know how to do this so that you can pass this skill at the interview. Let's look at some of the biggest things that senior developers know. The biggest one is how to say my bad. Again, maybe not at the top of the top of the top, where saying my bad is tantamount to I have failed, now fire me. But everywhere else, how to say my bad. Another thing that, the other things that seniors know how to say, this feature is too hard. Junior developers come and say, we can add this, we can add that, we can do this, we can do that. Seniors say, nah, it's too hard. It's not worth it. It's too hard. There's obviously a business element to being able to say this is too hard, because if a feature ends up with more sales or generates more revenue because it brings in more customers in some other way, then maybe it's worth it. But senior developers know this is going to cost us too much time if we have other stuff to do. Senior developers know how to make that balance between adding new stuff and everything else. Quality greater than feature. So making your code of a high caliber, of a high quality, is better than a code that has a ton of different features, but none of them work very well. Cough, cough, Blackboard. Never spend a day making something that takes 2 days to fix. There are developers that are really good, geniuses again, that churn out code very quickly, and it works. But it's so convoluted, it's so complicated, that once it has a mistake, it takes 2 days to fix it. It's better to spend 2 days to make something that can be fixed in 1 than to spend 1 day making something that can be fixed in 2, because the fixing is much more often than the making. So spend the extra time to make it right, and then you won't have to spend all the extra time fixing it. Okay. One more anecdote before we finish up on this. This is an apocryphal story. I don't think it actually happened or it belongs to anybody, but the gist of it is true. There's a junior developer. They make a mistake and they push something wrong to production, and the company's whole web server goes down. It costs them something like $1 million because it's down for over a day. Everybody has to work around the clock, so they have to pay everybody overtime. Customers are all furious. Second day, end of the day, the guy goes into his boss's office, says, all right, I guess I'm fired. And what does the boss say? He says, no, of course you're not fired. I just spent $1 million teaching you a lesson. You're not going to make that mistake again. Okay? So that's how it should be. You make a mistake, that's a mentorship opportunity. And whose responsibility is it that a junior dev pushed something that took down everything for multiple days? Well, that's the responsibility of whoever was supposed to review their code. If there was nobody, it's the responsibility of the whole company culture that allows junior developers to push code like that in the first place. When there's a problem, that responsibility is supposed to flow all the way up. So if you're getting blamed for stuff as a junior developer, you're probably not in a good company. All right, so with this in mind, we're going to do our own little code reviews for what you've done in the senior design class so far. Obviously, I'm going to make them quick because there's a lot of you. We're going to do this today and then next time as well. There's going to be a little bit of extra credit for the first people who volunteer, and then dwindling down after that. So if you want to volunteer to go like after this, then put something in either chat, and I'll get you first. So I'm going to take probably 5 to 10 minutes with each of you. Just make sure that you know all of the code that you have written in your master branch. I've synced up with all of your master branches as of last time. If there's something new you want me to see, I'll sync up with it now. It doesn't take too long. So make sure you know all the parts that you wrote so that I can ask you about it. First thing I'm going to ask you is, what did you write? Part of the reason I'm doing this is because I asked you guys to put those authorship credits on everything, and practically none of you did it, so now I have to kind of go back and figure out who wrote what, so I think it's a great opportunity to give you a sample code review. I will try to be as blunt and, um, let's say, hmm, direct as possible without being too rude to you. But again, I'm not going for positivity on this because I want you to experience real criticism as a practice anyway. So just try to come up with all your code, organize your thoughts, remember why you did what you did. Hopefully you have all that stuff recorded already, but if you don't, maybe you want to compile it into some written notes, maybe not. This is going to be an in-class grade in the technical writing class, so I will put that assignment up shortly here. And again, if you want to volunteer to go first, put that up in Discord. Otherwise, I will see you in senior design. And after I've finished with all the volunteers, I'll just start calling people in randomly, or I'll upload a list or something. I think we'll probably have enough volunteers to keep going through the rest of the day-to-day. Now, this is all going to be individual. Somebody asked in Discord, is it going to be group or individual? It's all going to be individual. I've talked to you guys as groups enough, so it's going to be an individual thing. And I am, for your grade, I am not looking for your grade for this particular assignment. I'm not looking for you to have done a good job with your code or anything like that. I'm looking for you to have organized your thoughts, be able to tell me what you did, why you did it. Just generally be prepared and ready to defend yourself. You don't necessarily have to be right. Your code doesn't have to be good. You just have to be responsive and able to discuss your code at request, basically. All right. See you guys in Discord, or see you next time.